Today we set out into a post-apocalyptic world where you get to explore a bullet hell-inspired Metroidvania. Why not snag the grappling hooks, because it's time for us to get into Rusted Moss. Let's talk about the genre this game falls in. What's this game like? What's this going to deliver to players? Talk to me about that.
It's like more of a Metroidvania type game that's more focused around physics-based movement. So a lot of the game is oriented more around like a hook shot that's like very complex. And so as opposed to other games, there's a lot of time just spent trying to like understand the hook physics and movement and kind of using that to explore the world.
With that in mind, you guys have a demo out right now. So with that demo, how much has player feedback impacted kind of, the physics-based gameplay? You mentioned it's less bullet hell, it's more Metroidvania. So has player feedback impacted kind of the direction you guys have been taking with this project right now, or is it kind of on the same trajectory at this point?
It's on the same trajectory. I think the feedback didn't impact it too much. We aren't dramatically changing anything. Like, we added some quality of life changes and bug fixes, a lot of bug fixes, and also like tweaking some levels to make platforming a little easier, a little bit more intuitive, and changing up some of the art in certain areas. But I guess overall, it was kind of important for us to actually write off some feedback as the feedback of someone that just isn't our target audience. Because I think our game hits a specific niche, not just like Metroidvania, but as Fax mentioned, our grappling hook is physics-based and it's more complicated than other grappling hook games. It's like elastic, it's like a bungee cord. So it's a lot about like using momentum and learning about the physics of the world, how to move through the terrain of it. And there are some people that really hated it. They didn't like that at all. They'd rather it be like just have the regular double jump or have a grappling hook that wasn't elastic. What the feedback showed us, and I think this was something that made us really happy, was that the elastic grappling hook also actually gave us overall very positive feedback. And so for us, it's just a matter of ignoring feedback like from people that said don't make it elastic or make it behave more like a standard one. We just had to kind of decide that the game was being made for people who do enjoy it, and like for us as well, because we personally like playing with it, and you can't please everybody.
You'd mentioned, there's a lot of physics-based gameplay in there, with the grappling hook. So with this game, first off, what's this game made in? Is it made in Game Maker? Is it made in Unity? What's the engine behind it?
It's Game Maker Studio 2.
From a technical standpoint, what's the challenge in creating that physics-based gameplay where you're trying to balance it, you're trying to make it so it's, it's more realistic, it's more intuitive to players? Walk me through just the challenge and kind of presenting that as a part of this game.
Well, I think the complicated nature of it makes it kind of hard to teach players. I would say that's like one of the more difficult parts of designing it, because you don't want to like spend a lot of time tutorializing how everything works, especially when it is so complicated. Like a full tutorial of how every single nuance of the hook would take like hours or something to explain. So I think the hardest thing is just finding that balance of like trying to explain something to the player while not making it too tedious at the same time.
Our first playtest of the demo actually didn't include a tutorial, and we noticed a lot of players struggling to learn that, so we had to kind of compromise and add some kind of tutorial section just to at least let them get the basics of it, because I think the best way to learn kind of these physics-based things is just to use it and to kind of understand the limitations of it by failing as well.
For you guys, when you started this project to now, what has proven to be kind of the most difficult aspect of bringing this title to life?
I want to say like the hook and like how that interacts with the player. There's a lot of like complications with sort of like teaching the player not only how the hook works, but like where it should be used and where it shouldn't be used. Because in a lot of other games it's a lot more obvious where the player can go and where they can't go. But since people playing this game aren't that sure, in very early playtests we would usually end up with having players that were just stuck trying to do something impossible for 5 minutes because they just didn't understand like what they couldn't do. And then there are other things that are very obvious that they just didn't see, and so I think that was like a huge problem.
Like making it physics-based kind of made it really hard for players to know what's possible. So I think, as like Fax mentioned, I guess a specific instance in the playtest where we saw this was we didn't make the hook shot be able to hook anything. You can hook something that we call like fairy moss in the game, which is kind of like green patches. So you're only allowed to hook these patches, but players would see a green patch and they would assume this means that hooking here will take me somewhere, or hooking here would definitely mean that as long as I hook there I can reach a certain place, because they're expecting using something that moves in a very predictable way. So they would not really think about the distance of when they're hooking, or maybe it's another green patch or further in that they have to hook. So we actually had a lot of discussion on whether we should start removing green patches to make it so that if there's a green patch there, you can definitely make it somewhere. But we ended up going in the opposite direction, where we actually just put a lot more green patches everywhere to start to condition a player earlier on that, hey, you have to like pay attention, you have to watch out and think about your momentum and how the grappling hook's relation is to you. It's like the opposite of Mirror's Edge, you know, where you see your paths highlighted in red that will help you plan your route. For us, it's kind of like making it more of a puzzle for the players to kind of like start learning these routes when the game starts.
So the game world, it's a Metroidvania. So with that in mind, obviously there's, you know, a lot of emphasis within the level design itself, where you can go back and just replayability, where you can explore different areas. So walk me through just the game world, walk me through kind of the level design, and then we'll go from there.
Well, the demo is pretty linear to start off with, because that part is just like a demo, so just wanting to show a player the slice of the game.
Yeah.
As for the game world, it's opening up, I guess, just in a typical like Metroidvania way, with ability gates for backtracking. So we're definitely going to be introducing like new areas and maybe some areas in the demo that you couldn't get to before.
Do you guys have like a central hub in your game? You know, a lot of Metroidvanias, they kind of lean into that because it helps players kind of have a place where they can regroup, kind of like a safe zone, basically. Is that something you guys kind of want to emphasize within this game, or is it not part of it? Kind of how does that work?
I guess we're considering whether or not to put it in. Right now there isn't really a central area.
A lot of stuff is just being planned right now, and a
Yeah.
lot of things change with playtesting as well, including like adding in more like safe areas, which is something we got from the demo feedback. But I think we're not planning around the safe areas. I think we're planning more like areas where you can do something and then thinking later afterwards as to like where the rest stops make sense.
With this game, how long have you guys been working on it right now?
I guess there's like sort of a green zone when like it officially started working,
Yeah.
but I guess maybe like September or October.
Since you guys have started working on this game so recently, what inspires you to kind of push the demo out so early? I know a lot of developers, they'll wait, you know, a year or some on, maybe even further into development to kind of push theirs out. What kind of inspires you to get yours out so quickly?
I think it's just that Fax works quickly. There's already so much done, and I guess, and we wanted feedback too, because, you know, at least had to see whether the game worked.
It was just important to get like an understanding of what the game should be like, because if you end up doing playtesting late, you might figure out like, oh, the room should be designed differently, and then you'll have like 100 rooms that have to be redesigned. Whereas now, since the game is kind of small, being able to do the playtesting now means we don't have to redesign a lot afterwards.
We did have kind of an extensive playtesting phase even before the public demo release as well.
Where would you guys say, you know, just outside of the finished demo, you guys are at currently within development?
Right now we're just trying to get a full understanding of like how big the game should be,
Yeah.
and like what should be in each area. Just trying to get a broad understanding of like generally where everything should be.
Do you know how many rooms we have right now? Because I know you've shown me the map. A lot of them are actually done, aren't they?
Oh yeah,
I don't-
it's kind of funny. All the rooms in the game were like made in like the first month.
So it's just kind of putting them all together at this point, you know?
Yeah, now it's
Okay.
just like a huge empty world for the most part.
Like, I think the full map is kind of done. Like, from
Yeah.
yeah, the full map of the game's done.
With this game, you know, you'd mentioned the story was kind of secondary because you were just kind of focusing on more of what the gameplay would kind of be about, you know. So is that something that you plan on leaning more into this story as you kind of progress further into development, or is the story kind of more secondary to this, you know, the grappling hook and just kind of quickly progressing through the world and the combat? Kind of where's that balance at?
I think we have an interest in like not making a bad story. With the way that our workflow is, I think it just makes more sense for the story to get built around the game. At least, I don't know whether you were Fax, but I know that I was kind of like interested in that. That was apparently how I heard Hollow Knight was made, despite the really deep lore and stories that you see in Hollow Knight. I heard that the story came way after like the entire game was made. I don't know how true that is, but not wanting to like step on like Fax's toes on like some of like the level design and game design that he's doing, it just kind of made more sense that as we went through the game, the story would come up from that as well. So the characters were actually designed before they had roles in the story too.
Saying that makes a lot of sense, because if you design the world first, if you design the players first, you know, everything prior to the story, it gives you more freedom, just because you don't have to create a specific area or a specific player tailored to that specific story. So, you know, I think that does make sense. I think, you know, there's a lot more creative freedom in that way for you guys. However, looking at your guys' Steam page, I noticed there's something called Fae Folk. Can you talk to me about what those are and how they impact the game?
Its story is a little bit inspired by folk tales, like kind of English and Nordic folk tales. Faxes from Norway, for example. And Fae folk are basically fairy invaders. So the world of Rusted Moss basically has different cycles. So long ago, the idea is that there was an age of magic where Fae used to be part of the world. But when the age of man kind of started, Fae wandered off to other lands. But now that the age of man is ending, as this is a natural cyclical process, the Fae are back. And humanity, of course, wants to kind of like lengthen this as much as they can.
So would they be similar to like NPC interaction within the game? Are there going to be like, Fae folk that send you on side quests, stuff like that? Or is that just, I know you guys are in planning phase at this point, but is that something you kind of have bookmarked at this point, or is that not part of this game?
They don't have like a specific role, like, okay, Fae folk are definitely going to be like NPCs. I mean, there are Fae folk that are NPCs, but you could like say that Fern is a Fae folk, and so is Puck, the little creature that follows you that turns into the grappling hook as well. And the story is basically set between like a war kind of between these Fae and the humans.
Talk to me about the gameplay itself, right? Because, that's kind of what you guys have really been focusing in on at this point. Talk to me about the grappling hook. Kind of, is it going to be able to be ranked up as you go through the game, evolved in some way? Talk to me about how that's going to change as players progress.
I mean, right now we're kind of experimenting with the different hook upgrades and trying to find something that like is fun and gives more mobility options, while at the same time not like necessarily breaking the game.
Yeah, it's hard to like give a specific example because a lot of this stuff is kind of in flux and being play tested.
So let's just transition over then in that case to the weapons within the game, right? Bullet hell inspired, so there's a lot of emphasis on what you bring into combat in that sense. So given that there is this planning phase that you guys are kind of working through, at this point, what is kind of hammered down is, it's gonna happen.
Well, for the weaponry, just trying to make sure to have like a variety of weapons that work in different ranges and situations as something to give the player like extra skill ceiling for like bosses or enemies encounters, having like the player like choose between pistols or like shotguns and railguns and stuff like that. Plus been experimenting with some like knockback stuff so they can be used as like mobility options as well.
We definitely have grenades coming.
So I guess outside of that, as a broader look at your combat, just kind of what you have so far. Talk to me about the gameplay outside of the grappling hook that's within the demo that players are going to see, and then if you have something that's outside of that demo, can you walk me through that as well?
Yeah, so there's a lot of the combat deals with like robots who try to like ambush you and like shoot different sort of like bullet patterns, and then there's sort of like having to like dodge them or maybe use like the grappling hook to get in like an advantageous position. And
hoping to also expand it outside of the demo for the grappling hook to be more than just a way to get around, but also a way to grapple enemies, which you can do in the demo right now, but it's not as helpful in the demo right now. Just like finding those opportunities to like start using the hook in more creative ways.
Are your enemies, are they AI or are they scripted at this point?
AI, I guess. Though in the current like demo version, the enemies are like pretty simple. They mostly just stand still or walk a bit. We're definitely gonna try to scale up the difficulty of enemies into further areas, as well as just trying to make enemies that like incentivize more like movement.
Some feedback that we got from the demo was that a lot of people found the enemies in the demo in the overworld to be like very simple, but even with that feedback, we're not sure whether we'll change that in the demo, because I think the demo for us is just kind of like a taste of it, like a starter.
Yeah.
And then hopefully as the new areas come up, that's where some of the more aggressive enemies and like more interesting behaviors would start like popping up.
One of the things that I saw on the Steam page was there's something called Trinkets. Can you walk me through what those are?
Yeah, they're just like gameplay modifiers. As you go through the game, you collect different trinkets that you can equip that just like buff you in different ways, like more damage or like run faster and jump faster, as well as some more.
Because the trinkets in the demo are pretty straightforward, but we hope that later on the the trinkets are going to be weirder, that would impact your playstyle in more dramatic ways.
Have you planned something along the lines of skills tree is much more in depth, so maybe not that, but like a leveling system, a weapon system, something like that, where the trinkets will impact them?
We don't really have plans for leveling now.
No, I don't think there's going to be any like more systems than are in like the demo or current version.
Okay, so essentially you guys really want to lean into just these trinkets that will kind of buff your different elements and aspects of gameplay.
Yeah, there's probably going to be some more movement upgrades
There's some
But other
permanent
than that-
upgrades too, because like you
Yeah.
can't equip like all the trinkets you find. You kind of have to make a choice, kind of like the Hollow Knight charm system, I guess, where you basically have like a limited number of, well, in this case, like points that you can allocate. So you pick your own combo of trinkets is kind of what we're going for.
When you guys approach the story, is the story going to be something that you want to branch? Is it something that's going to kind of evolve as the game goes on? Or do you guys want to keep it very simple and just focus on the gameplay element?
I know we have planned for multiple endings, but I think but inside the game itself, I don't know whether we have actual plans for like having side quests and things like that. I guess, depending on your actions, whether some NPCs might live or die, maybe. But at this point, what we have right now is just kind of like a story with the possibility for like multiple endings that we have planned right now.
Yeah. It's much more focused on the gameplay and kind of that progression of the character through your world.
Yeah, and the multiple endings are kind of based more like, okay, I guess if your character wants to do XYZ first before facing final boss or something, then something else different could happen. But these are more, but you could also face the final boss before doing those. So it's like those kinds of decisions that will affect how much gameplay you put in. Yeah.
Obviously, you guys are in early phase at this point. Do you have a trajectory you want to shoot for in terms of, I'm not going to say a date because obviously that's impossible to kind of pinpoint, but a release window?
For the full release, I'm gonna try to have it done before the end of the year. The next update is probably gonna be around June. Gonna have a small update for the demo.
In the game world itself, indie development, it's ever expanding. There's tons of developers out there. There's a lot of great things about the indie world. There's always some negatives though when it comes to that. So with development, with the indie gaming world, whether it's the player base being somewhat toxic, whether it's publishers taking advantage of developers, whether it's funding, whether it's limitations when it comes to knowledge when in development, what's something you guys see as a negative aspect of this gaming industry?
We talked about this before, but it's the pricing of games, right?
Yeah, pricing of games.
Like Hollow Knight's really underpriced. It's like $15. And I think you see in a lot of these like forums when people are like, what game should I buy? And people are kind of equating money to game runtime. So it's like, oh, why should I buy this? I can just get Hollow Knight for like $15. Why is your game so expensive? And yet these like solo devs, they're spending like a ridiculous amount of time in their lives and money just like publish a game, and the only way that they can make some kind of money back is to like price it at the place that they do. But I guess you can make an argument that, oh, that's just the market. Gamers aren't willing to pay that much money. But a lot of indie game devs are basically underpricing their games to compete with other games, and that makes it really hard to justify spending tons of time on a game only to price it at like $5, and it's just not sustainable for devs. It's not as big of a deal for people where it's just a hobby, but it makes it hard to make it more than a hobby because of prices and how gamers in general kind of just judge games.
And there you have it. That is Rusted Moss, the upcoming bullet hell-inspired Metroidvania that is not quite on the horizon just yet. However, why not head over to their Steam page, wishlist the game, go over to their social media, explore everything they have to offer, give them feedback, give them support. I'm sure they would appreciate all of it. But before you leave, I would love it if you liked, commented, and most importantly, subscribed for everything on the way. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I am Nick. This is The Side Quest, and I will see you next time.